Thank you all. I'm going to talk about one of the research projects that our lab is actively working on-device intelligence, and particularly how we do this with random projection networks, and also talk a little bit about how we kind of extended this work with deep random projection networks. So these are all the students who have worked really hard on this project. Before I go deeper into random projections, let's take a step back and look at why on-device intelligence is important. So there are several applications of on-device intelligence that we can think of. For example, the video tracking problem here that a couple of our students have done. We could see that these kind of applications can be used in human-computer interaction, security and surveillance, video communication, compression, and several other instances. We also have applications in other domains that you can see here. Recently, I think in the Android platforms, Google has deployed their smart messaging system, and there are several other companies who have done that recently. So when you have a small feature, a small set of classes or a small scale features, I think it is easy to use some kind of dictionary-based learning or some kind of lookup table mechanisms to solve these problems. But the problem comes when you have a large set of classes. How do you actually use existing algorithms? So we need some kind of machine learning light algorithms. And I think the recent one they've used is some correlation-based mechanism that projects into a space. That's what they've deployed with the smart messaging system. But the underlying problem for the hardware engineers is that, or even from the algorithm side, is that I think a lot of the problems that we are looking at, the data is unstructured, and we are creating lots and lots and lots of data every day. And there is a large portion of neuromorphic chips. I come from a hardware background. The large portion of the chips that we are designed today are focused on deep learning. And in a lot of instances, these require long training times with complex backpropagation through time models. This is very effective in terms of solving problems. But for on-device intelligence, this is very expensive in terms of realizing something like this in hardware. So we have to think about designing light algorithms that are robust and as well as fast in terms of learning, and that can learn through their lifetime. And a lot of algorithms, because there is this lack of symbiosis with the device architectures, and it is really important to work at the boundaries of the machine intelligence folks and the neuroscience researchers or the neuromorphic engineers here. I think we all have seen in earlier talks that it is really important to work at these boundaries so that there is symbiosis between these different aspects. So the goal here is then, okay, we want to design on-device learning accelerators and algorithms for real-time streaming data. So I kind of captured what are the key features that we are looking at for these on-device intelligence. We want them to be robust, we want them to be compute light, we want them to be memory soft, and in some way generalizable. So there are some subclasses within this, how we can achieve this, but the most important thing to realize is that these devices probably always need to have always-on intelligence. So there are several researchers who have started thinking about it from the hardware community. So one of the class of algorithms that we are looking at is more focused on random projection networks. So the concept behind random projection networks is that given an input space, X, so you say X belongs to one of the C classes, then the decision boundary separating the different classes of X may be a complex nonlinear boundary. So what the solution here with random projection networks is map this input space into a high dimension, and the condition is that that high dimension or the hidden layer dimension is always greater than your input space. And this transformation from X to H has to be nonlinear. So in the random projection networks, the term comes because this W that you're transforming is always random. So this is beautiful for hardware because these random projection networks do not inherently need to be trained within their hidden layers. So I'll talk a little bit more about that. But there are several classes of these random projection networks. You could think of simple feed-forward networks. There are several of them, simple like no-prop networks, extreme learning machines, and so forth. And then you can look at recurrent networks, which could solve more of the spatiotemporal problems, where you think of reservoirs, such as liquid state machine. I think we have Dr. Maas here. And then echo state networks. And then there is a new class that is emerging to exploit these kind of random projection networks to solve complex problems. And we call this the hybrid and deep network. So I'll present two different kinds of these deep networks that we have worked on. So before I go into the hybrid and deep networks, I want to give some of the background work we have done on the basic random projection networks. So for the no-prop network or the extreme learning machine or a simple feed-forward random projection network, so you're just trying to map the input space into a high-dimensional space, as I said earlier. The idea is that these weights in the intermediate layer that are projected from the input to the hidden layer, you're randomly initializing them and you are not touching them during the training process. And this is beautiful for a hardware designer because you could randomly initialize these kinds of weights using several existing hardware components like a LFSR or some kind of pseudo-random number generator. I don't have to use expensive hardware in how I generate these weights. And we're just looking at the output layer where you're doing some kind of classification, and this could be extended to multi-class, multiple classes. So the first network that we have built, or a very, for this is a digital architecture. This was actually earlier published in a SPI conference, but what we realized was that the random initialization can be just done using some kind of pseudo-random number generators, and we do not need any kind of additional memory to store these weights. So that has reduced the overhead significantly by the choice of the architecture. But then we also realized that there are ways in how we can kind of share the resources within this output or the hidden layers within this network. So we kind of did some kind of resource sharing where if you look at this baseline, this is your hidden layer and the output layer, and we're using some kind of coalescing here to share the neurons within the hidden and output neurons. And similarly, the folding technique where we are folding the hidden layer neurons. So this kind of shows, like when you try to do this kind of resource sharing, you can, what is the overall number of hidden neurons you get with this kind of implementation, and you can see that there is some reduction in terms of resources. And when we compare this with the topologies in terms of throughput, we see that obviously as expected that there is a drop in the throughput with these different resource sharing technologies, whether it's coalescing or folding. But when we look at the overall resources, you could see that the coalescing or folding kind of have good impact on the overall resources that are required for this kind of network. And then we looked at what kind of classification accuracies we get with this kind of architecture. So we looked at two different problems, diabetes and the Australian credit detection. It's more classification tasks. It's a very small network. You could just see that it's a toy network that we played with. And our proposed model, when we compare it with existing hardware models, which are VLSI implementations, we have done pretty on par with some of this, and we have done a little better. And for this, we didn't have any other comparison with MNIST classification, but that was okay. I mean, I think probably the machine learning folks here might cringe that we have 99.9% accuracy with MNIST, but this was just a toy demonstration. And then we started looking at recurrent random projection networks. We have done a lot of work in ESN, but today I'm going to focus on the liquid state machine, which is proposed by Dr. Maas here. And it consists of a recurrent network of spiking neurons and uses fixed random projection. So there is no training associated there, and then you're just doing the training on the output layer. There are several flavors of this recurrent random projection networks. So we've looked primarily at ESN and a liquid state machine, but one of our collaborators looks more extensively into time delay reservoirs as well. This is just, I would kind of skip this. It's more a detail of how this weight matrices are initialized and how this reservoir works. But then the idea is that to take this kind of network and realize this on device. So as I said earlier, we have done digital architectures, but they seem to be very expensive, and we could work on some toy problems. The results are okay compared to other hardware implementations, but we wanted to do better in terms of energy efficiency because that was the key when you're deploying them on the device. So the idea was to kind of build a neuromemristive core. We had a lot of experience earlier in working in memristor circuits and memristor designs for neuromorphic computing. So what we did was we took the memristor crossbar core, which acts as an inference accelerator, and we built a training accelerator called Jigsaw, which enables us to do this fast deployment on devices. Oh, sorry, something happened here. I'll just go back. So that's a simple Jigsaw accelerator here. You can perform the read operation in 2 phases, 1 column at a time. So you could, if you look at this as a crossbar, you can perform read operation on 1 column at a time. You are feeding in your inputs, you enable your read signal, and then you can read from any of these, from this column, for example. Similarly, you could write to the Jigsaw, write to this crossbar by initially turning off some kind of selector device here, which is actually creating a bias. We turn that off, and then we turn it on to kind of either increment or decrement the weights. So this has worked pretty well because all this requires is these 4 additional transistors that we have here, 2, and then 2 here, which kind of build like a H bridge, and then we have a selector transistor to either turn on or off the bias. So we have seen, I'll skip through that. So the control unit for kind of enabling those read and write operations is very simple. We have done digital logic with it, and the number of transistors are shown here. And we've kind of synthesized this for an IBM 65 nanometer technology, and we see that it is a pretty small overhead. It's not too expensive. And there are several applications of Jigsaw. So we've kind of tested with stochastic gradient descent. We have tested with short-term plasticity, spike time dependent plasticity, and also with backpropagation. And I'll show in the later part of the talk how we've used it in the deep LSMs. So again, when we started testing this with toy problems, we here try to do some kind of classification task on Wisconsin breast cancer data set with Jigsaw and the standard technique. You could see that with stochastic gradient descent, we did not do as well, but with the backprop, we are pretty close to the standard test with the breast cancer data set. One thing we wanted to ensure that our design was also pretty robust to variations and noise, which is inherent to this kind of technology, as well as when you're deploying onto the device, you want to ensure that these algorithms are robust. So this is in collaboration with Sandia, Dr. Marinella's group, and he has done a lot of characterization for a specific device of tantalum oxide that's fabricated here. And we've captured what kind of noise variability is there on these devices. And then what we did was we took this variability and embedded in our reservoir network. And the results are beautiful because when we looked at a temporal pattern recognition, this is a synthetic data set, you could see that as you increase the number of input features here from 1 to 13, the percentage of neurons failing, you could see that there is some kind of graceful degradation. And then we kind of tested this on, again, another 5-feature temporal pattern recognition. We kind of took the 5 features in here and did more extensive analysis. And with the percentage of neurons failing, you can see that the degradation in accuracy is actually pretty graceful. So you could have a portion of your neurons failing in the reservoir, and you still could have a pretty decent accuracy. And when we tried to do it with speech recognition, this is with timid data set, we got pretty good accuracies with this kind of implementation. So we took this algorithm, and with this analysis of the noise, with the noise analysis, we said that it is a good time to kind of look at the overall architecture implementation for this. And so we combined the Jigsaw and the Memristor crossbar core, and we kind of just taped out our first design 6 months back, and we're waiting for it to get to do our test analysis. So you could see some kind of estimates of how the power consumption for some of these blocks are. And we compared with some of the existing work out there in terms of these crossbar cores, and with Jigsaw in our work, we have like 2 devices per row or 3 per column in terms of synapses. And when you think of like how does it scale up with a big crossbar, when you're thinking of 10 by 10 array of neurons, we have around 150 memristors. So it is pretty scalable design. Okay, so this gives us our baseline. So from here, I'm going to talk about 2 flavors of deep random projection networks that we have worked on recently. So the first one, we call that the deep LSM. So in this case, the input layer is treated as a layer of linear neurons with identity function, and the spiking stimuli to the network is directly passed as spike trains into the liquid layer, and we have an encoding layer in between these liquid layers. So we have implemented different kinds of encoding layers, either it is in pooling or in random projections or STP, and you could see that with this kind of deep network, you could have information from richer timescales to slower timescales, and this entire part is unsupervised. And again, we're thinking of hardware implementation. We have a pretty scalable design in here where you have 2 transistors for input neuron and 3 transistors for output neuron. So for example, one of the parts within this encoding layer is short-term plasticity. And when we look at the implementation for short-term plasticity, it is very expensive if you look at these equations to implement in hardware. So what we did was we simplified it significantly for on-device implementation, and we had pretty good results with this kind of simplification. We kind of dropped all these exponential terms. When we looked at this unsupervised encoding of temporal signals, again, for some kind of synthetic data set, when we looked at just with STDP, and this shows STDP with intrinsic plasticity and STDP with synaptic scaling, and here we show STDP with intrinsic plasticity and synaptic scaling, some kind of normalization. So just with STDP, we see some kind of saturation, and if we just use intrinsic plasticity also, you see some kind of saturation, but you see a lot more, a good distribution of weights with both synaptic strength and intrinsic plasticity coupled with synaptic scaling. So with these different features embedded in our encoding layer, we tested this on 2 different data sets. Again, we used the timid speech corpus for the phoneme classification task with 5 layers on the deep LSM. So this is kind of the input stimulus that you could see in here. And we got 91.7% accuracy on this. And we've also done this for EEG seizure detection using dual path implementation of the deep network. And we got pretty decent accuracy on that. The state of the art is still much higher than this, and we are still working on improving this. So that was the first deep LSM architecture. The second one is actually we said, well, instead of just using the reservoirs or the random projection networks, can we couple it with the benefits of CNN to build these deep random projections with CNN? So the idea here is that you have some kind of feature extraction that is that you're benefiting from existing CNN architectures. And we kind of build this architecture called convolutional drift network, where you can see that, where we are trying to do video activity classification. So if I walk through the architecture, what we are doing is separate the video into frames in our first phase and extract the appearance of features using an existing CNN like ResNet. And then we use ESN, or a reservoir or a random projection network in here, which extracts the temporal features. And then we do some kind of pooling to summarize the video features, and then finally classify the pooled representation. So in the interest of time, I think we have only 2 minutes or 1 minute, so I'll try to skip through some of these slides. The feature extraction part that I want to highlight is compatible with most deep CNN models. As I said, you could use ResNet, VGG, or you could deploy any of your newest CNN frameworks in there. And the temporal features, we used ESN, but currently we're also exploring how LSM works in this scenario. And then in the classification, we did the pooling, but and used simple softmax classification layer at the output. So the beauty of this entire architecture is that throughout the entire network, in this baseline network, you are only training in the one layer where this whole training occurs for a video activity classification. And that is very effective when you're deploying for, on the device. So the training is happening only at the output layer. So I'll skip that. So we tested this on 2 different data sets, DocCentric and UEC-Park. So the DocCentric data set is a first-person video captured by camera mounted on dogs performing different kinds of activities, for example, fetching a ball or something. So I want to show you the complexity of this one. So if you can see, the videos are very, this is a hard problem. So when we tried to use the CDN, so we compared this with 2 existing models, existing deep models that have done this video activity classification. So the first block here you see is when you use some kind of handcrafted features in these deep networks. And the second block here you see is when you don't use any kind of handcrafted features. And when we do not use any handcrafted features, you could see that the convolutional drift networks, the same is represented in this plot here. The convolutional drift networks, whether it's with VGG16 or ResNet 50, have outperformed these implementations. Same is the case with UEC-Park. We didn't have any other comparisons to do without handcrafted features, but we have really state-of-the-art results in terms of this video activity classification. And we are designing an on-device accelerator for this, where we have this off-device training with the CNN implementation, and this one I've already shown some of the early results for this architecture. So kind of summarizing that in terms of energy, if you look at where the energy is expended in an architecture like this, so you can see that this is the deep network we used with the ResNet 50. If you look at the feature extraction is where we are spending a lot of this energy. Actually, ESN or any kind of random projection network, the energy dissipated is really low. So that is, again, very advantageous when we are thinking of on-device intelligence. So in conclusion, we utilize random projections to minimize the training complexity. And we have shown that it can be deployed on devices because of its energy efficiency. And it also has some kind of symbiosis with the memoristive devices we've been looking at. And early results show that these deep architectures hold promise. And we're exploring, the transfer learning architecture, which I've shown at the end with the CDN, has a lot of promise with video activity classification, and we are going to explore in other domains. So I would like to acknowledge the sponsors and the great group of students I have to work with, and thank you all for your time.
Can I have one question? What's the mathematical difference between the random projection and the support vector machine?
Sorry?
What's the mathematical or the equation type of differences between this and the notion of support vector machines?
So the difference between a random projection network and
the notion of VAPNIC, that you take a data, you take it to a very high dimension, and then do, the simplest is linear, like a perceptron, but then you can do other things too.
I've shown like 3 different classes of random projection networks, right? The simple feed-forward, I mean, you could think of it like there are several models, like, you can think of the random kitchen sinks or the extreme learning machines, which can solve the spatial problems. And then we're looking at the reservoir computing models, which have some kind of fading memory embedded in it. And that can solve both the spatial and temporal problems within this domain, instead of just the spatial class that we are looking at in the SVMs. Yeah.
Hi, the results are actually very disappointing. Take MNIST, for example. 91 is not serious even. I mean, anything below 97 is not serious. But my question is about, it's a purely black box model. What about interpretability? What about continuous learning? I mean, what can you do if you see new examples? Can you explain, I mean, the results, or it's just a number, 91%, and we don't know how we
Are we talking about MNIST, or are we?
The whole this architecture of random kind of reassignment in a different space. I mean, what it tells us about the internal dependencies, I think not too much. And the results are very weak as well.
So the MNIST classification, I agree, is not a good result. It has only 91% accuracy, as we've noted. But in terms of interpretability or generalizability or continual learning, we are just looking, we've just started looking at the video activity classification problem, but we are trying to extend it with what happens when you give these new classes of inputs, how this network begins. This is in a very early stage in terms of looking at that. I agree that continual learning has to be still tested on these things with different classes of problems.
Let's go ahead and thank Darisha again.